as part of the Young Statistician Networking event. My name is Carmen Ling, and I'm currently the Vice President for Medias and Communications for the SSA, and I'm also sitting on the branch council for the Queensland branch. Before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the University of Queensland is situated, the Turrbal people, and pay my respects to the elder past, present, and future. So some housekeeping notes. Emergency exits are to your right, and then to your right again. Toilets are actually located on, if you go straight, and it's actually on your right. So I would like to thank the Queensland branch of the SSA for sponsoring this event, and to UQ for allowing us to have the event here. Career events as such are rare, but they are not uncommon when I was a student. In recent years, our branch runs annual career events to make sure that you, the young professionals, are aware of your career options and the skills that you need to build upon as you progress to the next stage of your career. To students, it's totally okay to feel like a lost lamb despite completing your studies. We hope that these speakers will be able to inspire you. And remember, we are the society for you. Our branch runs regular branch seminars, and we are also planning to run a mentorship program for early career statisticians, where we plan to match young professionals with a senior statistician in a similar field. The list of benefits for members is long. We have distributed the flyers at the entrance, and we encourage students and young statisticians to sign up to be a member. I will now pass on the event to our young statistician representative for this year to introduce our speakers.
This is Minju. Before I introduce all the speakers, let's connect to our speaker from the US. I think it's 2:30 in St. Louis time, so this speaker do make a lot of effort to join us. I will just introduce our speaker while we are looking for our speaker come in. Before I introduce our speaker, can I know my audience? Could you please put out your hands with me? Thank you. Put out your hand. And then put out your hand if you work directly in statistics. And then put out your hand if you indirectly work with statistics, say psychology, data analysis, data science, or okay. And then have you ever, put out your hand if you ever learn a subject related to statistics? Okay, put down your hand. So I'm so glad you are not just here for today for the pizza. Thanks very much. Thanks for coming, everyone. Okay. Our first speaker, let's welcome to Professor Jeff McLaughlin. Jeff McLaughlin has made a seminal in statistical machine learning. He has written over 300 research articles and 6 monographs. He's a fellow of Australian Academy of Science and was awarded the International Federal of Classification Society's Research Medal for Outstanding Research Achievement in 2017, and the ICBM Research Contributions Award in 2011, and the Pittman Medal of the Statistical Society of Australia in 2010. So please welcome to Jeff.
Well, thank you, Mingzu, for the generous introduction and for the opportunity to be here this evening. I should apologise in advance for my voice. I've had a bad cold, but I've been on antibiotics for a week, but I still got it. But apparently these things seem to last quite a bit this year. So, I thought I'd put a title on this, and this is just, I call it Teaching and Researching at UQ. As you may be aware, I've been at UQ for quite some time. If you want to look up details about what areas, what papers I've been working on, etc., well, my homepage down here carries it has a lot of information on it. And also,
I think our third speaker. yeah, he's here. Hey, Jason, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. I think Jeff just started his talk, and then we will introduce you in around 30 minutes. So you will say hello to the audience later on, okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So I was asked to speak on these 4 points, and I'll say a few words, particularly about the first few, and see how we're going for time. Just a little bit of history, and I'll start off with this married couple, Mildred and Sid Prentice. Sid Prentice was Professor of Electrical Engineering here back in the 60s, and that's going back a little bit, I know, for some of you. And he was responsible for getting the first mainframe computer at this university. And as you can imagine, in those days they were big as a big two-door fridge. And we used to do computing by having punch cards and taking them across to the Prentice Centre. But of more relevance to us, his wife Mildred, she had a lectureship in statistics in the maths department, where the statistics was in the maths department, and the maths department now is in a school of maths and physics. And Mildred Prentice, she was this person called M.M. Barnard, and she wrote this paper back in 1935, and she did a PhD under the famous Fisher. If you do anything about statistics, you would know that R.A. Fisher is the father of modern day statistics. He was a genius. He responsible for the concept of randomization to reduce bias in any experiment. His work was done in an agricultural setting in Rothamsted, but in clinical trials or anything, he pioneered the idea of randomization, and of course he put forward maximum likelihood that we still use today. So what was unusual about this was, first of all, she was a female being there doing a PhD, and it was unusual for people to do PhDs back in those days. And of course, doing a PhD under Fisher, well, she could have got any job she wanted in the world, really. She would have. But when she came back to Australia, I think she worked perhaps for CSIRO for a while, but then when she had children, and so she never really worked again until she came back to UQ to do some lecturing. And she had some she had some interesting stories to tell about Fisher. And because Fisher was a fairly prickly character not for her, and naturally she was showing respect, but for anyone Fisher viewed as being not a competitor, but if anyone was a bit said anything slightly disparaging about his work, he was extremely, he could get pretty mad. But And so Fisher had a number of children. He had a daughter called Joan. She married a famous statistician. She married George Box, who became a famous statistician. You got the Box-Cox transformation. They later divorced, but Jane Box wrote a biography of Fisher. And she came to Brisbane a few times to visit Mildred. Mildred also knew Betty Cochrane, the wife of Bill Cochrane. He was the author of Cochrane and Cox. He was you might say, famous statistician, and he spent the last part of his life being head of statistics at Harvard. Brad Efron, who is perhaps one of the most highly regarded statisticians today, told me that Cochrane was never wrong, but obviously that's not completely true. Then when Joe Garney became head of Maths and Stats at CSIRO, he's actually born in Egypt, but he spent most of his younger days in Australia, and then he went overseas and became a professor at Sheffield. When he came back to Australia to head CSIRO, Maths and Stats, he brought a lot of people out here. We had Sir David Cox, Sir John Kingman, Morris Bartlett, John Nelder, all these famous names in statistics, and then some Americans. Well, John Tukey and Ted Anderson. John Hartigan was an Australian, but he had gone to become professor at Yale, and he really never came back except to visit us. So, although you might think doing statistics here at UQ, we're sort of isolated perhaps from the rest of the world, we felt that we knew what was going on due to the stream of visitors that we had. Also, I did my honours degree here, and I suppose I specialised in statistics and pure maths. I didn't really like applied maths, fluid dynamics. I actually found it very difficult, so I was... but I liked statistics, and also it did have the option that if I didn't really make it in academia, I could get a job working for CSIRO or the government departments, such as whatever it was called, Department of Primary Industries or Department of Agriculture. And so I did a PhD, and I did it in discriminant analysis. You can see the title of the thesis there. I wasn't trying to follow in Mildred's footsteps, but it came about because, well, when you're a PhD student, you basically not completely sure. Well, I wasn't really sure what problem I'd work on, and there was this really nice paper that came out around about 10 years before I started my PhD, and so I got reading it, and I could see that perhaps I could do some original research. But that's always an unknown question. I think anyone, doesn't matter how well they do in the exams, when it comes to doing a thesis, you're in mathematics or statistics. You always wonder, just how you're going to go. But these days there's more scope. You can do more of an applied statistic. You can do extensive simulations. Back in 73, you had to do a solid piece of mathematics to get a PhD in statistics. So basically I've been at UQ, been employed by UQ most of my working life. So in 73, I got my PhD, I was married, we had a home in Brisbane, and on the river, but it didn't have a river view, we're on the roadside. But and I was a tutor, but I really needed the job, and there was a hint that might be a job for me here in 1 or 2 years. So I was offered a lectureship at the University of New England, and while I was going there, I was offered a job at the University of New South Wales, but I decided to go to the University of New England. But as we were packing up to leave to go to the University of New England, Brisbane had this tremendous flood in 74, and we were sitting in our unit watching the water come up one desert block at a time, and my father told me, don't worry, as water rises it spreads, but it just kept coming up, and it came about about 2 feet into our unit. But because it was a big block of units, we rolled up the carpet before the water came in and took everything up sort of stairs. So, and then we left it, when the water went down, we left for New England, for Armidale, and it was a tenant's problem really then. I mean, so we got someone in to clean the place up, put the carpet back. But, so anyway, the University of New England had a big stats department, and we were quite happy there, apart from the cold. And but rather fortuitously for me, a young professor from India decided he would go back to India, and so a position came up, and so I got reappointed from the 31st of December '74. Now, but although you must say I was fairly interested in remaining at the same place, I did spend 6 months at Stanford. We had a 9-week-old baby, so my wife was a little bit apprehensive going as our first child, but it was very well. Stanford is a very nice campus. It's got its really own shopping centre, and you wouldn't know what was going on in the rest of America. And but what was really good is, of course, it's got, at that time it was ranked #1 jointly with Berkeley, and since then it's always been ranked #1 in statistics. And they had lots of professors there. It used to have joint seminars with Berkeley. People like Jerzy Neyman, he was still alive, but used to come to the seminars. And I drove to Berkeley for a seminar at Berkeley. That day there was someone on the Bay Bridge shooting at people as they went across the bridge, but there was, they didn't get my car anyway. But so anyway, so I got to know a lot of people. The head of department, Paul Switzer, had us out for Thanksgiving Day, and when he came to Brisbane, he stayed at our place. And so I got to know people like Brad Efron, and then I kept up these acquaintances because I started to travel quite a bit. And my younger son keeps reminding me that I wasn't there for his first birthday. But anyway, so although I've been here employed at UQ, I sort of I'm aware of what's going on in the rest of the world and know a lot of statisticians. So supervised classification, I mentioned I did my PhD in that area, and so this is what we mean by supervised classification. And we sort of got 2 classes. You've got data from each of the classes, and how do you estimate the error rate? Well, in the ideal world, you've got what we call a training set, and then it's separated, if you like, by a brick wall that doesn't come into it. And it doesn't allow you to test the test set until you go to test the thing. But unfortunately, these days particularly, you may have only a few samples with microarrays, because each microarray originally started costing, I think, $10,000. Now it's down to a few $100s. So, but anyway, so this is in an ideal world to have this holdout sample, but that doesn't often happen. And I started to write a book because I collected a lot of references during my thesis, and this book had 1,300 references in it. Now, so what's one particular problem that I worked on in besides error rate estimation, and it's called selection bias, and it's you can read what it is there. The main thing is, if you use the data to build some rule or some classifier, then you've got to be careful using that data to work out its error rate. And Christophe Ambros came from Paris to work with me, and his wife had just had a baby and 2 other children, and Brisbane in those days seemed to have a terrible summer, probably no hotter now than our summers, but they've never been back to Brisbane because they didn't have air conditioning, and they lived in a small house in Milton. But I'm good friends with Christophe and his wife, Martine, but we see them in Paris, not here. But this is an example. So this is one of my most cited papers in statistics. these authors here, this Batnick is a famous scientist, computer scientist, and I don't think he could have read this paper really, but they devised this method of how to reduce the number of variables, and they claim that there's a lot in this diagram, and there's a lot in this diagram, but basically they said that if they if you read this diagram from right to left, they said if you keep reducing the number of variables down, you get to basically a zero error rate. Whereas the true error rate is that solid line there with the error bars around it. So that was a big error, and we were lucky to find that error. And now you might say, well, that was 2002, but here's the paper in 2016 in a fairly good journal, Pattern Recognition Letters, and it's making the same mistake. This is supposed to be the error rate dropping down almost to nothing really as they increase the number of variables, and that there's a selection bias here. I was actually at this seminar when the person gave it. Now, how did I get into unsupervised work? Well, as I said, there's a very nice paper on supervised classification by Hills, and one of the it was a red paper, so someone discussed it, C.A.B. Smith. He was a well-known statistician, and he suggested that why not go about dividing a sample up and doing these things. He uses the word bootstrap. You recall later on, Efron in 79 called his method the bootstrap. So I set about having a look at this problem, but I really cheated. I couldn't handle a completely unsupervised sample, so I introduced some observations having labels to make the mathematics equal. Not equal, enabling me to do it, and so I came up with this result here that this gives you the error rate after k iterations, and the idea is the error rate is supposed to go. To work, unfortunately. The error rate is supposed to go down. It will if these terms h1 and h2 are less than 1. This is one of my favourite results actually, but when you're putting in the grant and they ask you to put in one of your nice regards, you can't put a result that you've done in 1975 because they say, oh, this person, he's peaked and he's done nothing for the last few years or something. But this, I think, it's a result that I like very much. But, and of course then the EM algorithm came along and that really got people's interest in mixture models going, and this is a definition of a mixture model. I'm just putting the definition up. I know this is not a seminar, but instead of having a single component, we take a linear combination of them, and it's a convex combination because those pi 1s, the pi g there, the constants, they're non-negative and they sum to 1. So you get a lot of flexibility, and for example, you can see that you've got the potential to have a very flexible way of estimating densities. So I think Kay was about my third PhD student, and so she worked on mixture models, and I think at the time when it came for her to submit her thesis, she had about 5 or 6 papers, so the examination process was quite straightforward, and Kay got her PhD, and then a year or two later we decided we'd write a book, and I was fortunate enough to be in Scotland at the time because Michael Titrington, a well-known statistician, was bringing out a book, and we sort of, and so I knew what he was talking on, and our book was more about, rather than the properties, it was trying to push the idea that there was potential to use mixture models to cluster data, and so now Larry Wasserman, who's a well-known statistician, he's a member of the US National Academy of Sciences, he used to have a blog, and he wrote that mixture models is the twilight zone of statistics. And he's got this comment down here that they come up all the time and they're obviously very useful, yet they're a strange beast. So a lot of people were put off by their unusual properties, or they can have unusual properties. So I think that this book went some way to making people aware of the practical potential of using mixture models, and that's the cover of the book. And talking about writing books, of course, Kay has written a book with a much more distinguished person than myself, and namely John Tukey, because John Tukey is a famous scientist. Besides things in statistics, he coined the word software, the word bit that you use in computing. There's a person from India called 3M Bakam Krishnan. He liked to be called Krish, and fortunately for us, with a Christian name like that, he came to Brisbane to see me about writing a book on the EM algorithm. I think also he wanted to come to the Brisbane Cricket Ground because he loved cricket. And but anyway, he while he was here, he wrote many letters to the Australian about how umpires. We didn't have neutral umpires in those days, and how they weren't really being neutral in their decision. So he had a student called Sumya Dutta Pine. He likes to be called Pine. And he was at the Broad Institute, which is a joint institute of MIT and Harvard. And he wrote to me, he wanted me to have a look at fitting mixtures of skew distributions, because when they looked at these, the data on these markers on cells as they were passed through a beam, they didn't have an elliptically symmetric shape. And even when they were cultured in a laboratory, they still had this, and so this got us fitting mixture of skew distributions. And this slide is just a current problem that I'm working on. If you like, we've got two classes there, and each, this represents patient 1, patient 2, and they've got this distribution, and the population of their cells looks like it needs a 5-component mixture to model it. But these people aren't all the same, and they don't have identical distributions, but we want a representative distribution for the class. So we build a template for each class, and then someone comes along and we have to assign them to one of these two classes, and so we look at the pullback libel distance between the sample distribution and that of the templates, and then we can make a decision what to do. And we might want to, we know what some of these clusters represent. They could be memory T cells or naive T cells, and we might want to do things to them, stimulate some of them. And so by having the distribution represented by a mixture, it allows us to actually go further into it. Now, I'm out of time, and I think that's about the last. Well, things from an employer's perspective, I would say that one should really try and do as much statistics and computing and as one has time for. The other thing I would say is I think you have to keep aware of what are some topics going on. In statistics, we've got some people from within not liking p-values. P-values are misused. Some people don't understand what a p-value is. But before we get rid of p-values, we need some other alternative. So there's that taking place. And the other thing is, of course, is that from time to time we get a paper like this that comes out by a very respected epidemiologist and medical statistician, but it's sort of the thing that's being plotted here is the probability of a false positive, and obviously if the odds of a relationship are very low, because in statistics we're trying to make decisions in the presence of noise, we will make errors, and so as the odds get very small, then the chances of making a false positive will increase. And he's introduced some probability that a person, if they get a non-significant result, they'll change it into a significant one. So all this is just based on his reading of what these things should be. And there has been some criticism of this, and there's this paper, 2014, not that long ago, where they try to estimate what the false discovery rate would be from papers submitted to the top 5 journals in medicine, and they got the error rate to be about 14%. So, well, I think I've got way over time. So I'll stop there, and I think the last thing said, would I do anything differently? Well, I mean, of course you would do some things differently in hindsight, but I wanted to remain in Brisbane, not that I got any great attachments to Brisbane, but once your children start going to a school, and it's very hard to move, and also the University of Queensland. I always thought the University of Queensland had been a good university. And it's gone from it's getting better. So, I should say, statistics at UQ is the only department in Australia that's got the top rating in all the eras that have been conducted. Yeah. So.
Jeff already started to introduce our next speaker, and then Kate Vasco, she's the third PhD student of Jeff many, many years ago. Kate Vasco is professor of very integrated. I'm sure people can zip through that.
We're just having a bit of trouble here, sorry. Thank you very much. I'm going to give quite a different talk from Jeff. I'm not going to mention any equations whatsoever. My background, I went to a local Bremer State High School where I happened to enjoy science, maths and science. My advice from the career advisors at the time was, do you want to be a medico? No. Do you want to be a lawyer? No. Well, why don't you be a teacher? So I went and came to university to be a high school maths and science teacher. But to do so, I had to get a scholarship. But I clearly wanted to keep my options open. So I took a Commonwealth scholarship rather than a teacher scholarship. The difference being that I got the same full living allowance, because my mother was a widow, but I wasn't bonded for 4 years. So I think things like keeping options open are very useful. I enrolled for, at the time, what was called a BSc Honours, which actually did honours courses all the way through. It's somewhat similar, I believe, to the current Bachelor of Advanced Science program that's available here. So I did nothing but mathematics from second year on. I decided then, well, maybe I won't go and be a high school teacher. I think I'll get a job instead. I got married then, and I got a job as a biometrician in the Department of Agriculture at the University of Queensland. I wanted my maths and stats, which I'd majored in, to be useful. I hadn't done a single biology course. I hadn't done anything to do with agriculture, but I was being employed for my statistical skills. I was working in another discipline. You can almost work in any discipline if you're a statistician. And I ended up working in agriculture, which was good because I liked experimental design and analysis of data. They were the two aspects that I was really enjoying. So I worked in this department, and it was a really interesting department. There were lots of people doing PhDs, and I thought to myself, I might do some part-time study. I came back and talked to the head of the Department of Mathematics at the time, Steve Lipton, and he said, oh, you've just got married, you've just started work, you don't really know what area you're in, maybe it's not wise to take on a PhD. Why don't you do a coursework master's? At that time, you could do a coursework master's in various projects. See what you like. Then if you work out what you like, probably you'll be more committed to a PhD. That was actually good advice. I think he was being condescending at the time, but it was still good advice. So I did some part-time study. I had 2 children along the way. I kept my full-time job, got my PhD after my Master of Literary Studies, which was my coursework master's. And I then thought, I've got all my degrees at the same university. If I want to do something else, why don't I think about working or having a postdoc somewhere else? So I applied for a Fulbright postdoc. I was successful in that and went and spent a period at Cornell University in their Department of Plant Breeding and Biometry, because plant breeding was the area that I worked with in my department back here at UQ, and I worked with Walt Federer. That was where I got to meet John Tukey, because Walt and John were colleagues, and we went to the same conference, and so I got to meet him then. It was a fantastic experience having that Fulbright postdoc, because I got to work with some of the best statisticians in the world. In terms of a biometrician, it was Walt Federer at Cornell, and in terms of a general data analyst, it was John Tukey at Princeton University. So my experience of US universities has been Cornell and Princeton. Fantastic. I came back with enormous confidence that I can do this, and I got a network and colleagues that I worked with for the rest of their lives. Fantastic experience. I joined academia in '88. That, as a TNR academic, you do teaching, you do research, and you do service and engagement. They are the 3 activities that you're involved in. Teaching, I taught introductory, intermediate and advanced statistics, or biometrics as it's called in biology, to agriculture students, not to science students. You have to know the discipline in which you're working. You have to learn what's important for them and how you can show that understanding statistics is useful in their career, because they don't think it's going to be. As far as they're concerned, mathematics, why do I want to do anything about that? So it was a challenge, but you learn good skills. And you also had postgraduate students, and 2 of them you're going to talk to, or are going to talk to you today. I have been very fortunate and have had about 25 PhD graduates, and I've still got a couple of students, one of whom's here today. And I will mention those 2 books. I'm very proud of them. I only have 2. One with Jeff and one with John. One thing I was very proud of as well was I was awarded the Australian Medal for Agricultural Science, and that was from Ag Institute Australia. Now, to me, being a statistician and getting a medal from a society based on another discipline was pretty special, because it showed to me that I had been successful in being able to work well and have intellectual input into the problems and solving the problems of the area I worked with, and that's particularly being plant breeding and quantitative genetics. So we had actually had quite big impact, and I'd come from another discipline, but I became immersed in this area. I had found my niche. It was at the intersection between applied statistics, quantitative genetics, and plant breeding. And finding your niche is something that I think is important for people starting out. Work out where you fit. I was not going to be a theoretical statistician like Jeff. He was good at that. That wasn't my cup of tea. I liked the applied work. While working as an academic, I was elected to the UQ Senate. That is the body that determines the governance and the strategy for the University of Queensland. This was a fantastic experience. I very much enjoyed that experience, and I learnt a lot about how universities run, what motivates them, how they get their funding, how all the different components go together, particularly at UQ, a comprehensive, research-intensive university. Every school or department wants things, but you're competing across the board, whether it be music, engineering, medicine, science, agriculture, law, business. The university has to service all those needs. From 2001, I became head of school. And again, for someone who had a statistics background, I was head of a school at that time called Land and Food Sciences. I subsequently became head of a school called Land, Crop and Food Sciences, and we were initially here, we were across campus with Gatton, there were lots of mergers and divorces and mergers, etc. And this was in the Faculty of Natural Resources, Agriculture and Vet Science. After those terms finished, I became president of the academic board. Very much an area that oversees the programs of the university. After that finished, I had a sabbatical, which was I only had 2 sabbaticals in my academic career, and this was one I was given. But I ended up coming back and working in the School of Maths and Physics, as it was then, as the interim director of the Centre for Applications in Natural Resource Mathematics, CALM. I was asked to fill that job when someone had left it until they got a new director, and it was because I had very good relations with people in the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, because CALM does a lot of work in fisheries research. And they wanted someone who had that applied outside focus. And then just recently, I was asked to be head of the School of Biomedical Sciences for a period while they were going through change. So now I'm in the Faculty of Medicine. So I've managed to be in NRAS, science and medicine. But again, my view is that when you've got a statistical background, you've got lots of skills that you can use across different areas. Of course, when I talked earlier, I said there was teaching, research, service and engagement. Not only do you have service within your school, within the university, you have committees, you help run things, you advise, you have open days, you see students, you also are expected to be involved in your professional societies. The 2 societies I was most closely involved with were the Statistical Society of Australia, and I organised conferences for them. I became branch president. I organised national conferences, and I became president of SSAI, and providing service. But you're developing networks, you're developing collaborations. You get great support in that way. Not there. I also mentioned the International Biometric Society. We had an Australasian region of that. Again, I organised conferences. I became president of the Australasian region. I organised the International Biometric Conference in Cairns in 2004, and I became president of that. And I was very honoured to actually get life membership of both of those societies for the work that I put in. But I got just as much out of it as I put into it. You get out what you put in. You don't get paid for any of that. It's just part of your contribution. But it really means that I know statisticians all around the world, fantastic networks that you develop. What I had intended to do when I finished my term as president of the board was do a lot more as an independent, non-executive director. Because when I was on Senate, I realised that particular sort of job, you're on the board, you're a director, you're trying to make decisions in the best interest of that entity. As a head of school, I was offered to do the Australian Institute of Company Directors course, because it was felt that heads of schools should understand how to run an entity, because that is effectively an entity you're running. You have to understand strategy, you have to understand responsibility, etc., what you're doing. So I did that course, and subsequently I ended up being back on Senate again when I was president of the board as a non-executive, as an ex officio person. There are two ex officio people on the academic board. One is the Vice Chancellor, and the other one is the President of the board. Again, a fantastic experience. So, and since then I've been invited or elected to be on the board of the International Rice Research Institute, which is based in the Philippines, has programs in different parts of Asia and Africa. I'm Vice President of the Academy of Technology and Engineering, and I'm also Deputy Chair of the Ipswich Hospital Foundation, which is actually looking at raising money for the Ipswich and West Moreton Hospital and Health Services. So none of these pay you anything, but you are actually giving back in your engagement, and you're learning lots of community expectations about what goes on and what can be done. At the same time, of course, you've got to maintain your family relationships and keep that going. My husband and I have two children who now each have children of their own. We've enjoyed travel, camping, sport. My husband was a national basketball referee. I got involved in score table in supporting him. He's been involved in coming along to conferences that I've gone to. It's important that you have support, and you don't forget that in the end, family is what matters. You do your job, but when you leave in the end, bye-bye. So you can't forget that side. I was asked to talk about skills. I think the skills that were important in developing and enabling me to go in a very strange path were analytical and methodological approach. I know how to make data-based decisions, collect data, analyse data, interpret the data, make decisions from them. I have a very collaborative team ethos. You have to find your niche in a multidisciplinary space. All the big difficult problems in the world today are multidisciplinary. They involve lots of people working together. You have to provide intellectual input. You have to respect other people's intellectual input so that you come to a way of attacking the problem. And take advice from mentors. The attributes that I think people need as they go through their career. Be open to opportunities. When I first worked in agriculture, the postgraduate dentists, the orthodontists, used to come and learn statistics in the Department of Agriculture. So my first 6 papers were all with dentists. And sometimes when the university's collecting papers and they say, these can't be yours, Kate, I say, yes, they are. Because that was the group I worked with, they were the ones I was helping. Gain skills and experience which may be useful. At one stage, my boss at the time was taking a study leave, and he said to me, do you want to teach my classes? I said, yes, please. They were skills that I thought I might find useful at some stage. Did I get paid for them? No. Did I even think about asking for them? No. They were things that actually I felt I would enjoy doing, and and I felt I was going to benefit by them. Don't ask for money for everything. Don't expect financial return. Have confidence that you can do the task at hand and work hard at doing it well. You have to put the work in. Reflections, lesson learned. Mentors are invaluable. Things don't always go the way you expect or hope. You'll have some disappointments. You'll learn to face those. Not everyone gets a prize. And sometimes alternative routes or options can be actually more rewarding. You end up somewhere you didn't plan to be, but that's fine. That's not a problem. My view is you be strategic. You learn some things. You try things. Prepare for opportunities that may come your way. Be principled. Have people know where you stand. People I work with know that I never say something that I don't believe is true. I won't tell them I can do something immediately if I can't. And if I tell you something, I'll tell the other person the same thing. It's too hard to play games. And if you're doing a task, be focused on it to make sure you get it done. Never regret your choices. You can't go back and say, oh, if I'd have made that different decision when I first came out of uni, maybe I'd be somewhere else. It's gone. Don't waste your time worrying about the decisions you made or the choices you made. You've made them. Go forward and, most importantly, enjoy what you do. If you don't enjoy it, then for goodness sake, walk away from it and do something else. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, for sharing her untraditional statistic career pathway, but we do learn a lot. And then next let's join. Let's welcome to our next speaker. And you might not know our next speaker was one of the highest peer-to-peer students many years ago. As Vice President, Machine Learning for Objective Computing Corporation, Dr. Jason Pu contributed more than 20 years of analytics leadership. His work has been recognized by Forbes for accelerating the development of analytic-driven decision models to transform industry global R&D pipeline. He also pioneered the application of AI, big data, and the Internet of Things to create predictive digital advisor that are enabling digital farming and transforming agriculture around the globe. Jason, for multiple patents, has been the recipient of many awards for technological innovation and served as a volunteer advisor for economic empowerment initiative in Sri Lanka. Welcome to Jason.
Good day. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you answer it?
Yeah. Can you see the audience?
Good morning. It's good to see you. Well, I'll follow on from what Kay was mentioning, and I've kind of lived on a similar corner to Kay, maybe a little bit different most of my career. I've lived on the corner of analytics and technology to really scale out analytics primarily, and business value. So my big drive in life and career has been creating new value. I've lived in the corporate sector pretty much my entire life, and really some of the things I took away from the education was, stats is really a mindset. Kay touched on this with, information is key to making decisions. And when you're working in large multinational global companies, information is really the lifeblood, because a lot of people can have opinions, a lot of people can have beliefs. At the end of the day, it's the information and the analysis that really tells you what's valuable and where the company needs to go. The thing I've loved about analytics is in doing that sort of analysis, you can use new data to expose new opportunities. You can look at the analysis differently to see new opportunity. And at the end of the day, competitive advantage in companies is all driven by seeing the future before your competition and or creating the future before the competition. And that's exactly what analytics is focused on. And I'll tell you, my career is essentially a byproduct of what I wanted to get done. I've really not spent and never spend much time thinking about career, but I spend a heck of a lot of time thinking about what I want to get done and why. I'll give you some examples. When I first started at Monsanto about a little bit over 20 years ago, I was kind of thrown into a group of mavericks that was really a really small group of mavericks, I might add. There was really 2 or 3 of us at the beginning, and we were put in this group to invent molecular breeding. And at that point in time, molecular breeding didn't really exist. If it did, you could manipulate essentially one population, one breeding population. So we got to work to invent, okay, how would we do this? Is it worth doing? Does it create any advantage for the company? That was a big part of my formative years, was figuring that out, developing haplotype-based breeding, proving the value to the company, and ultimately we switched all of the breeding efforts to be molecular-based. In doing that, what it really meant was we needed IT systems that were capable of doing that. Hundreds of breeding programs, at that point in time, probably about a dozen crops. So we needed to scale that technology out, because technology unscaled is essentially useless. So at that point I joined the IT group, and really I was probably the first person with a domain background, domain in breeding, to join the IT group. And I ended up leading that group for the company. All of R&D, information technology, was what I led. And we scaled that technology out, and while there, we started looking at predictive technology. And it was kind of fun, because back then it wasn't called machine learning, it barely existed. There a few seminal approaches, and we said, well, let's see if there's anything to this, see if this is useful. And we started looking at our breeding pipeline and saying, well, can I predict which ones are the best hybrids to advance? And can I look at which hybrids ultimately are going to make the most money for the company? What create the most value in the marketplace? And can I do that many years in advance? The breeding pipeline cost hundreds of millions of dollars a year to run, and if we could focus that better, it was a large outcome for us. So interestingly, I hired 2 or 3 people and set them to work on that, and really in very short order we proved, yeah, you can. And in fact, probably half the breeding pipeline you could predict was never going to create commercial value very accurately. And that was a big outcome when you're spending that amount of money, and the profitability of the company is essentially that. So at that point I moved back in and ran what was called trade integration for the company, which is where all the transgenic events get put in the commercial lineup. So everything the company sold from a germplasm viewpoint went through this pipeline globally. And that's where we really united this predictive technology with the company's pipeline, so that we could create the products that mattered the most to farmers, having the best trait genetics. So super valuable. In doing all of these technology upgrades, you end up focusing a lot on the technology and a lot on the organisation, because the speed at which you can move is often slowed down by the human element. So getting people to really see the future, see themselves in the future, is where you often spend a lot of time. After running trade integration for the company, we then started thinking about, well, we're creating these great products with great genetics. How are our farmer customers really using these products, and are they creating the most economic benefit from them for themselves? And we started looking at the data, and again, what the data told us was, well, there's $1 billion opportunity here for us to do better. And that was the birth of digital ag for the company. And I moved into the digital ag group, again, a fairly small division that was really put in place to revolutionise what we were doing. And we ended up commercialising the first machine learning application to place products, to help growers inform which products to purchase, what portfolio of products, much like a financial decision you might have, stocks and shares. And then how to manage those products, what density to plant in that, when to harvest them. That was hugely successful, and it actually gave us the opportunity to rethink the entire seed industry, which predominantly is driven by selling seed, a bag of seed. So you buy a bag of seed, and that's how the seed companies sell their products. And what we found was this value we were creating, obviously as a company you need to share in the value you're creating. So what we wanted to do was switch that to an outcome-based pricing methodology, to where companies like Monsanto or Bayer would share the risk of the products being purchased, and also sharing the gains of the products being purchased based on their yield at the end of the year. Huge step. That's still being figured out, but currently it's on a few 100,000 acres. During that time period, I really looked at all of these technologies and started thinking a ton of application in ag, also a ton of applications in other industries. And that's kind of the beauty of looking in technology and analytics, is you're not bounded by an industry. So at that point I moved out to OCI to start leading a business, creating a business for OCI, where we work with a lot of different different industries, including some mining industries in Australia, retail industries, ag industries as well. And using this exact same sort of approach to how can we bring technologies to companies much faster using the expertise we've gained. In terms of the the experience that have led to this sort of career, I think the big ones are, and Kay touched on this too, is find what you love to do. It takes a heck of a lot of effort and time to become good at what you do. So you better enjoy it, because if you don't enjoy it, it's drudgery. And I think one of the things I've learned along the way is, learn this about myself and a lot of people that I've managed as well, is learn what you're really good at. And that sounds like a really easy question, but most people get it wrong. Because the thing you're really good at comes naturally. Often you can overlook it. It's the thing you do really easily. Often it's the thing where you look at other people and you think, why are they struggling with that? This seems really easy to me. That's probably the thing you're really good at. And when you build a career around what you're good at, your strengths, A, you enjoy it, and B, it's kind of a lot easier and a lot more fun. So I don't know, over the years I've kind of, been kind of self-observant on things that, what do I not put down? What am I always picking up a book on? What am I reading on? What am I obsessed over? I'm kind of an obsessive personality, so that always helps to drive success. And the other thing I'd say is, do you. Always be authentic. Just find what your brand is, what you stand for, what you want people to understand and remember about you, and be authentic to that. Don't try and fit into the world around you. People will remember what you do, and you want them to remember that. My role has always been to build really great teams, which means that I've had to be very empathetic because no one's really on their A game every day, and my hiring philosophy has always been bring in someone that's better than everyone else on the team at something. And that doesn't really lead to a great job description. I don't really believe. And I'm always on the lookout for someone who thinks a little differently, has a skill that the rest of the team isn't that good at. Someone who can really catapult us forward. And that's always been my hiring philosophy. Finding a company that you admire, I think, is important. I've always worked for companies that I admire. There's no perfect match in this. And at the end of the day, you'll have to do work on yourself to fit in and work on the company. As I look at the impact one person can have on a company, almost all of the big shifts have come from 2 or 3 people. This is companies of 20,000, 30,000 people. Initially it comes from a couple of people, ultimately thousands of people have to do what you've invented or what the new direction is. But that power of one is super important. In terms of skills and kind of what to expect, I think that the hard skills, the hard lessons learned at university are super useful. I think the softer skills in terms of how you approach problems, how you think about problems, are likely the ones that have more longevity. The reality is what I learned about breeding at university. We've reinvented at least 2 times, if not 3, and if I was still doing what I learned, I'd probably be an antique. But the reality is how you think about those problems, how you think through them, that remains. So with that in mind, being curious is super important. And a lot of us are curious in some aspects of our lives. I'd encourage you to be super curious about things at work. The people who go far are often the ones who come in the morning and say, hey, I've been thinking about this all night. I've tried a few different ways of doing it, and here's something I've learned that I think's useful to us, and that's driven by curiosity and passion. And that's really what propels companies and organisations forward. Another thing I keep in mind is, often you do the job before you get the job, and a lot of us kind of grow up with this romantic notion, at least I think it's romantic, that the boss is going to come in and say, hey, you've got this really great big promotion, you've never done any of it before, and it's going to be fantastic. And that may happen. It never happened on my watch, it never happened to me. What's more natural is you give people part of the job you want them to do, part of the career advancement, and by the time you're actually giving them the entire job, they're already doing it. And what that means is you're always leaving value on the table. And I think you've just got to be comfortable with that. That's the way you progress in life. And it's certainly been something I've done, certainly something I still do, and I think it works well because if you can take some of the more routine tasks or the things that they struggle with off their plate, that frees them up to create more value. The other thing I'd say is, networks are super important. I think, we've heard people talk about a lot of others and their impact on their careers, and having a network and actively participating in that network is super important. A lot of the people sitting next to you today will probably go on and run large organisations and be really successful in their careers, and the bonds you form early on stay with you throughout a career. In terms of lessons learned, I'll give you a couple. I'm a fairly conservative person by nature. I like to understand the risks and rewards. I like to analyse things, and if I'm ever seen to be moving fast, it's because I've done all the homework and people just don't know about it. So the learning here is, dreaming bigger and acting bolder. I worked for Rob Fraley for a lot of years. He ran R&D for Monsanto. And, Rob would always say, we can't think big enough, we can't move fast enough. And that was his way of encouraging bigger thinking, more impactful thinking. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to move the needle in a big company, they have to be big dreams. So dreaming bigger and acting bolder, I think, is something that's a mindset. It can be learned. Anything can be learned. Next one is, touched on it before, connections really matter. I left a Fortune 500 company and decided to start up a business in a mid-sized technology company, and that was a big shift. Networks matter because everyone from my former team then reached out and said, hey, can I come work for you? And ended up hiring quite a few people that we worked together for 5-10 years before that. And bringing A players out of a Fortune 500 to a mid-sized technology company is not something that happens every day. So that was purely driven by them knowing my brand and them having trust in me as a leader. So, in summary, I'll give you a quick summary of kind of my key points here. First and foremost, find your passion. Do something you love, do something you enjoy, do something that ignites a fire within going through the motions ain't worth it. Next thing, stay curious, be curious. If you aren't a curious person, get curious about being curious. Curiosity is a learned skill. If you want to be curious and focus on it, you can learn to do that. That will drive career success for you. Build a network, be conscious about networking. Dream big. Again, a skill that can be learned. If you're going to have a big impact in the world, like Kay was saying earlier, if you can control everything you're dreaming about, the dream's not big enough by definition. And you have to be able to work through and with others, get them inspired by the dream, help share the dream and shape the dream. I'll come on here with one final thought is, the thing that I've loved about analytics and information technology throughout my career is it's a vehicle for innovation. It's a way of looking at what people are doing and freeing yourself from the mundane. The ability to move to the next frontier is super important, and that's what separates companies, and that's always what's driven me. So for me, it's been a fantastic career, and it's one that I'm still in, and it's taken a lot of different turns along the way, from straight analytics to straight information technology to working in businesses to doing all three simultaneously. So super cool. I wish you all success in the world. So thanks.
Join me to welcome our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Ronald Hatch.
Hi everybody. So it's pretty daunting when you had your academic parent and your academic grandparent and your academic sibling speak before you, but it's very cool for me to be part of this special event, actually, to have my academic parent, grandparent and sibling in the same audience. So I'm going to take you through what I speak about as solving the equation through a non-linear career path, and if you want to tweet about some of the things I'm talking about, there's my Twitter handle. So remember that question you were in primary school, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I had no idea. My context when I was growing up was being a veggie farmer's daughter. And the way that I got really excited about mathematics was the patterns I saw as we were cutting cabbages and packing them into boxes. And understanding that I didn't have to count every cabbage because there was a pattern in the way you laid it out in the box. So I was always asking my dad all these bizarre questions, and my nickname was Curious Cat. So it was interesting that Jason was talking about curiosity. That I was always asking Mum and Dad on the farm about all the patterns in mathematics I was seeing out on the farm. So with that, I thought life must be a bit of a simple prediction equation, because in school you got to learn through to high school about simple prediction equations. And for me, a career was, one of these basic simple prediction equations. Life was pretty easy when you're going to map success for yourself. So success is the Y variable, was do all the learning between 0 and 12 years old. But Mum and Dad said, you better go to university, you might learn something, so get a bit of training. And I always knew there'd be errors along the way. So off I went to university. So I went to Griffith University here in Brisbane and did a degree in environmental science. And that environmental science degree, if I did it now, I'd have a major in environmental science and data science. But it was the 80s when we were all being told we weren't going to have a job because of the financial situation. So just to be safe, I did a joint degree with QUT as well in education, like Kay did in science and mathematics. So when I was doing that environmental science degree, we're out in the field a lot. There I am out on the rivers. We're actually picking over insects that are in water samples from rivers. So I got a lot of application in that degree, looking at orb weaver spiders and seeing what their patterns were for feeding within an orb web. I was on the mud flats out around Cleveland, looking at bird feeding habits in the tides. So I had a very big application focus out in the field working on environmental problems. So then I adjusted my prediction equation. Well, it was a relatively simple equation now, not purely simple. It still was looking at success for a career. I knew what I'd learned earlier was still important as that threshold. But the training was, what I was getting interested in through my undergraduate degree was multidisciplinary kind of activities, because I was working in a lot of different ecological domains, and a lot of our projects were with industry and government in our third and fourth years of that degree. So I was looking for more training that would enable me to harness those things I was really interested in. But I thought there'd still be errors along the way. My honours supervisor at Griffith, Janet Chaseling, took me along to a conference on the Gold Coast. I thought I'd really made it when my supervisor asked me to go there. And that's where I met Kay, actually. And Kay was looking for a PhD student that had been working in the same kind of pattern analysis, machine learning kind of area. So I joined Kay. I still remember the day when I got the PhD scholarship from the Grains Research Development Corporation. I thought I was just getting on an elevator and off I would go. That, you know, my career was on track now, I was starting a PhD. Little did I know that, there's a slide that missed out there, is that you can't take the elevator when you're doing a PhD, you've got to take the stairs. And the interesting part about taking the stair was I felt that I was in a Harry Potter movie, because, you know, the stairways kept moving. So you thought you were going up, but actually you were going down. So I really did enjoy studying my PhD. Why did I enjoy it so much? It was motivated by an industry problem. I mentioned it was an industry scholarship I had with the Grains Research and Development Corporation. My dad played a lot of levies into that organisation because he grew a lot of grain, so he finally thought he was getting a bit of a return back. So my thesis is across 3 different domain areas. So its core was around data science and the pattern analysis kind of technologies, but it touched on peanuts. And so I spent time over in India during my PhD, because the data sets I was looking at a world collection of peanut germplasm. So it was very large data with many different attributes. So I was trying to solve the problem of how do you analyse data from that have many different characteristics. It wasn't all quantitative data, it was qualitative data as well. How do you put all that in together? But there's also environmental information that I had to take into account as well. So I was drawing on my environmental science, my love for the pattern and numbers, but bringing in agricultural science just to keep my dad calm for a little bit, that he was going to get a return on me going to university. So in this kind of context, I mentioned that I spent time with the Indian government, so that was an amazing experience. I got more culture shock coming home than being in India, actually. And I also spent time with government, because the Queensland government was doing a lot of programs on developing the peanut industry in Queensland at the time. So I ended up having this experience that not only having academic advisors, but industry and government as well. So there we go, no elevator to success, you've got to take the stairs. So after I finished my, just before I finished my PhD, I said, okay, I might start applying for a few jobs. Kate thought that was a good idea. So I did a few different interviews, and it was all in about the same 2-week period. And I had 2 offers, one from Charles Sturt University, one from New South Wales DPI. But the job that was going to optimise my husband and I was going to be one down in Adelaide with CSIRO. So I hit the jackpot, won Gold Lotto, and got a job as a postdoc with CSIRO. 18 and a half years later, I left CSIRO. At CSIRO, I started as a postdoc, working down in Adelaide, and I worked with Fording Pharmaceutical, looking at why the development of their drugs and the manufacturing process wasn't working. They had seeds of drugs and they were spraying the drug onto it, and it was being very variable. So when they were testing the drugs before they went out, they kept failing. So this was in the late 90s, and they were losing $2 million a day. And I was sent in as the consulting statistician on my own, a couple of years out of postdoc, to solve the problem. And the interesting thing was, it wasn't the statistical methodology and analytics that solved the problem. I got there, I said, show me the room where you're doing all this work, spraying everything on. So I walked into the room, looking around, they were showing everything to me. I said, where's the air come from for spraying on this stuff? Oh, it's up there. Where's the air coming from? Outside. So are you regulating the temperature of the air? No. So what was happening was, because of in Adelaide the temperatures fluctuate a fair bit, it was the temperature that was causing all the problems. So it wasn't actually their manufacturing that they were doing, it was just this simple thing of they weren't conditioning the air. And that was such a profound moment for me that I actually had what it took to help that company stop wasting $2 million a day. That I got the confidence of, I sort of did know what I was on about. So in CSIRO, I worked, as I mentioned, in the health area. I did a lot of work mainly in the environmental area, working on the Great Barrier Reef in terms of monitoring programs. Most of my work has always been in this big landscape scale monitoring of ag and environment together. In CSIRO, I managed to work in lots of different areas, as I've mentioned, but I also did my leadership journey there. When I left CSIRO 18 and a half years later, I was the chief of division. It's now called Data 61. Many of you have probably heard of Data 61, so I was the chief of that. So I went from managing small teams to very big teams, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. So what I'd learned there at CSIRO is actually I need to solve multiple equations, it wasn't one equation. When you're leading big teams of people, you've got lots of different equations of success that you're thinking about. When you're starting to lead bigger teams, you've also got organisational KPIs, as Jason was saying, you need to deliver. And so you have to infill with what you've learned to date, continually keep training, because the way that you have to then lead teams of people, of quants. So in CSIRO, I had 450 PhD level people to feed and nurture in terms of making sure they had a job, so we were earning enough money, but also that I was nurturing them, that they would stay with us as well. And there was always errors to be made as well. Folks have spoken about mentors. There's some of my mentors there. And they're from people from not only statistics, but from innovation, from overseas. And one lady at the top there is an organisational psychologist. She's been my coach for a while, and she's still my coach today, actually. So it's about I put a lot of work into understanding myself before you can understand other people and really help them and nurture their journey. And I've represented my journey here as a bit of a zigzag. And this is a bit of a pedagogy about thinking about your career and progression. So when you go through these different stages, it's not the ramp up that's difficult, it's the turn that's really different. So when you go from being a PhD student to a postdoc, your relationship with your peers and your supervisors change. You're usually working with different people. And it's those changes that are really hard, because the pecking order, the politics, how you get things done all changes. So I went to being an independent researcher, then started leading disciplinary teams, then I started leading multi and transdisciplinary teams. When you're bringing in money and you're going out there pitching to industry and government to bring in money to make sure people have got jobs, that keeps you alive. Then moving through to setting research directions, where you're deciding what the research of the group and the division will be. Then you're leading multifunctional teams, where I was leading not only statistics, ICT, mathematical modelling, but also HR and finance and business development. So there's a lot of different things when you're running the business of research that you need to be able to deliver. And then leading organisational strategy and implementation, and that brings me through to the current role that I have. So when I left CSIRO, I went to QUT and was leading a research institute for 4 years. And my main remit there was to bring people from all the faculties together to work on problems at scale. So we ended up developing a major digital agriculture initiative, actually a cooperative research centre, and a number of other different things. So then, after 4 years, I've been now with UQ for a year as DDC research. And so I think the main statistical skills I use now are still the data evidence approach to everything I'm doing, whether it's looking at allocating budget out, looking at scholarship strategies, looking at our partners. It's always a data-driven approach to what I'm doing. So in terms of managing career pathways, my kind of lessons here is make sure you deliver. So think about having a performance planning on an annual basis. Most startups and companies and governments have this. So this is about delivering for me when you're doing annual performance. But you also have to dream, so you need to have a 5-year plan. That's about your personal development planning. So you need that 2-speed economy. Often people just think about their annual objectives, not their 5-year dreams. Jason said, think big. And the other is opportunities to connect with the best and how you ignite and really excite the kind of things that you're doing. So for me, I always got ignition through hanging out with people like me, quantitative scientists, hanging out with people that were my collaborators, and they were mainly agri-environmental researchers. And the other was hanging out with impact partners, the ones that gave you money for doing your research and research of the bigger team. So you knew where their policy and investment was going to be. So then it wasn't hard for me to chase the money for my research group or all those 450 people that I was looking after. So decision and policy makers within organisations. So I often think about the progression. Everyone thinks about careers just going up the ladder in organisations, but I think my non-linear pathway has, in CSIRO, I led the Sustainable Agriculture flagship for a period of time, and then I went back to mathematics and statistics to lead the entity that they now call Data 61. So often going up isn't the way to do it. You might have to go sideways to go up. And that's what I did with my adventure leading CSIRO to come to the higher education sector. I wasn't sure the higher education sector would be able to do transdisciplinary research, really get all the faculties working together, so I was sort of intrigued and curious about whether you could do it in a higher education area. So I did a sideways move out of CSIRO to QUT that helped me then go up to other areas now at UQ. So in terms of modes of working with other people, I think as a statistician this is really important. The challenge is often, are you in an enabling discipline or a leading discipline? Do you want to have an enabling role with colleagues, or do you want to lead, particularly if you're still working in research? So serial cooperation, someone gives you the data, you go off and do it and give it back to them. And when you start off in your career, that's a little bit of what it's like, this serial cooperation. You have to get used to working with people like that. Then as you get more confident, it's about parallel cooperation where you're working together on something. And then you move through to what's entwined collaboration, where the ideas of both of you are equally important and you're creating something different through coming together. And this entwined kind of collaboration is where you need a lot of street smarts to be able to work in it, because you have to value other people's ideas, sometimes ahead of yours and vice versa. So it's how you have dialogue with people, where dialogue is two-way and not just one way. And so this transdisciplinary practice means you're operating in an ecosystem, not a battlefield, and often you'll see that in your careers, that there are people who want you to be there and you enable them, or whether you're leading particular aspects as well. So that's often been the tension through my career. When am I an enabling supporter versus leading and creating things myself? And the other is embracing diversity of view and being inclusive. Being very generous with people will come back as that gift that keeps on giving. I might move through to the end now. So success is a little about thinking about legacy. It's not only your childhood lessons, but it comes down to your competence, so that's your technical competence. It comes down to your character, how you interact with people. And lastly, the chemistry that you have with the people that work around you and the culture that you're working with. And you'll probably still have a few errors along the way as well. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Brown, for a fantastic book. And then her career pathway show us you can do so much beyond the statistics. You can lead an organization as big as you should with your statistical foundation. Thanks very much. I think we are running a little bit behind, so we just do some quick Q&A session, and then we just. Jobs told us 800 state village. I will say 300 state statistics. So, is there any questions for our four speakers? Yeah. Yeah.
No dumb
Maybe
questions.
just a few quick questions if you got for our speakers. Any questions? Yes, please.
I have a question for Kate. You mentioned you do your job well, but family is more important. Is there always a tension there though?
Oh, there's always time's an issue because you have to make decisions about what time you spend on things. But in most cases, if you are in a supportive relationship, well then, sometimes family time wins, sometimes work time wins. One thing that we always did was we always had a holiday. I think that's something that we all gain by having a holiday. And the only time that when I was just about to hand in my PhD, I ended up working on that holiday. But in general, I think having a holiday makes all the difference. Sometimes people just want to keep working year after year after year, and you need a break.
Yes, please.
Like young statisticians like us often work in isolation because we work on project specific. So how do you overcome isolation?
I think you try and talk with people who are working in similar areas and just try and go along to things like this, meet some other young statisticians, use the available opportunities to find other people who are working in this, under the same conditions, not exactly on the same problem, but under the same conditions. That networking is really important.
I think the other thing that's very different for you than for many of us has been when we went to university, it was our pleasure to be here. But for you, it's our pleasure to have you here. So I think there's a lot of things that the university environment puts on for you to broaden things out. So the entrepreneurial endeavour. So because you're in statistical science, and Jason's probably taking photos to see who's going to employ at the same time, you're some of the hottest capability on the planet at the moment. And
That's
so
right.
I think your experience will be very different particularly because of the startups. Most of the startups are based on the capability you have. That's what the new business models are around, is around AI and machine learning. And so I think getting involved in some of the entrepreneurial training that's on campus is really important because it helps you in your pitch. And I think it extends you to a network far beyond just a research practice as well.
Yes, please.
They say data analysts probably spend 80% of their time cleaning data. And in my lifetime, I haven't encountered any data set that doesn't need to be cleaned. Can you share some experience you clean the very dirty data and what have you learned from that?
I'll give you one example. I was working on a data set with John Tukey, and John said, let me look at the data. And he scanned the data like this and said, oh, that number looks wrong. And it was for a plant that had a reasonable yield and it was only this high. And I was mortified that I didn't pick it up. I hadn't looked at the data as carefully as he did in a quick scan. There's no question that getting the data right in the first place is really important. Looking at your data, are there outliers? Is it all in the same region? Box plots, a few graphs. What does it look like? Look at your data before you start analysing it. Really important.
I know in my PhD I had this big data analytics kind of problem, and so it was really hard to scan the data. You had to do analytics on it to actually be able to scan it. As a more research consulting person when I was in the CSIRO, we had to work with a lot of government and industry folks on their data, and that was the way how I formed a collaboration with them, was getting them to do a lot of the data cleaning work. So I'd give them the principles of what they had to look for, but I had to educate them that I did not want to be this serial cooperation person. So I did the parallel cooperation, whereas I had to teach them how to get good quality data, not continually give me the crap data, or to become that data cleansing person for them. So I treated it as an opportunity for them to learn how to create better data. I think Jason's probably... Jason, were you going to say something then?
Yeah, I'll give you one perspective on that. Excuse me. Automation sets you free. The more you can automate, particularly in big pipelines and companies, excuse me, is super important, because you, like Ron was saying, you can spend the rest of your life cleaning data, or you can develop routines, algorithms, in fact, machine learning models that do the cleaning for you, and the imputation to go with it. So, super important to do it. I think once you get into the corporate world, a lot of jobs start to become highly specialised. So, you know, it's not uncommon in a company like Bayer or Monsanto to have several roles in and amongst, you know, model building, feature engineering, data cleansing, scaling out. All of those are almost certainly different roles, different teams. So, you know, figuring out where you want to play in the space is really important.
I think we are running behind. Let's finish with the last question. Who is the last one to ask the last question? Is there anyone? Okay, I think I got a question for Jason. I think lots of young graduates would like to know, it's like an old-fashioned question. Is that big company or small company or startup company for the first choice, for their first job? Which one do you think would be better for them for future career?
Yeah, it's kind of a great question. My daughter, Abigail, who came just finished her a degree in marketing analytics, and she was asking me exactly that question. And you know, I think the reality is you learn different things in different scale companies, and in a big company you get to meet a lot of people simply because it's a big company, so your networks expand, or at least they can expand very quickly if you're purposeful about that. You get to see highly specialised roles. Big companies tend to divide the tasks of a job up very specifically, so you can learn very deeply in an area. Small companies come to almost the exact opposite. You get to do tons of different jobs, a little bit like Bronwyn was saying. You know, you're going to learn marketing, you're going to learn how to do a pitch, you're going to learn to do many things just simply because there's not many people to do it. So you get a very broad experience and somewhat shallow because Small companies, there's not the experts there to learn from necessarily unless you reach out beyond that. So, you know, like everything in life, there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I think just when opportunity comes, we just take it, right? Thanks very much, and then your gift will be sent to you later on.
Like you said, this is for Brian.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.